everyone. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. It was 1950s America. Father William Grau was a black Catholic priest. Sister Sophie Lagoki was a white nun. They fell in love and had a son. Their 10-year secret love affair broke the rules of society and the church. Up next on Another View, their son, Joe Steele, shares the true story of the passion and determination of these two people to love each other, and author Lisa Jones Gentry, who shares their story with the world through her book, Forbidden Love. Plus, the history of Juneteenth and how a young teen is determined to live her life despite sickle cell anemia. Another View is next, right after this news from NPR.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective. This is Another View.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. I'm excited about today's show because we're going to share a story about love, and we sure could use some uplifting news in today's times. But first, we're going to talk about Juneteenth. June 19, the day when the enslaved people of Texas finally got word about the Emancipation Proclamation and that they were free. Virginia Governor Ralph Northam announced plans to make Juneteenth a state holiday, starting with giving the day off to employees in the executive branch. Many local government and private sector employees, including WHRO, have followed suit, declaring Juneteenth a holiday for their workers. Our Lisa Godley has the history of Juneteenth.
Oh, freedom.
President Abraham Lincoln had issued the Emancipation Proclamation 2.5 years earlier, freeing slaves living in Confederate states. As word spread, enslaved men and women walked off plantations and away from bondage, which was easy to do when Union troops were near. But there was limited Union presence in Texas, and knowing that, some Southern slave owners moved their enslaved workers to Texas and rebuilt their plantations there. It took 2 months from the time General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse for General Gordon Granger, along with close to 2,000 federal troops, to travel to Galveston, Texas, and inform the last of America's enslaved black people that the Civil War was over and they were now free. The date was June 19, 1865. From that day to this, there have been annual celebrations. Juneteenth is a combination of the month, June, and the day, the 19th. It is also known as Emancipation Day and Freedom Day. What started with an annual pilgrimage back to Galveston by formerly enslaved men and women, and later their descendants, is now recognized across most of the United States, often remembered with prayer, family reunions, and celebrations. Galveston continues to be a popular site for Juneteenth celebrations and is now joined by big cities like Atlanta and Washington, D.C. that hold large commemorations that can include festivals and parades. Although Juneteenth is not a federal holiday, it is currently commemorated or observed in 47 states. Texas was the first state to make Juneteenth a state holiday in 1980. Earlier this week, New York State made Juneteenth a paid day off for state employees, and Governor Ralph Northam gave state employees the day off as well, stating that this is an opportunity for us to really change the direction and change the course of history, not only in Virginia, but in this country. For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
And so those of my non-African American friends out there who keep asking me, what can we do? Take some time today and tomorrow and get with your family and look up the history of Juneteenth and understand why we celebrate and celebrate with us. That is one positive thing that you can do as we start to recognize and envelop Black history as American history, because that's exactly what it is. Can you imagine what it must have been like for Father William Grau and Sister Sophie Lagoki, a Black man and a white woman in love in the 1950s, a priest and a nun in a relationship, and a baby even though they weren't married? Remember, this is the 50s. What lessons can we learn from their story to help us mend race relations today? Joining us to talk about Forbidden Love is author Lisa Jones Gentry. Hi, Lisa. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, and thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Oh, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. And the offspring of the beautiful but forbidden relationship, Mr. Joe Steele. Hi, Joe. How are you?
Hello, I want to thank you again for the opportunity and also the lead-in with Juneteenth, because Black history is American history, and that's what we feel about the story.
Absolutely. So I'm curious, what do you think, Father Graw, both of you, what do you think Father Graw and Sister Sophie would think about the push to make Juneteenth a state holiday in Virginia, but also there's a groundswell now to make it a national holiday? Joe?
I mean, I think they...
Go ahead, Lisa, since you started. That's fine.
Okay, no, I think that both of us are jumping fast. No, I think they would be very, very happy. I mean, as you can see in the book, they were both very progressive people. Mm-hmm. Father Grau was a real, what they called in those days, a race man. He did a lot of significant things for the Black workers, helped them unionize in the area. He was very aware of Black history. He was a chaplain in the Buffalo Soldiers, served in World War II, was a decorated veteran. So he was very much a Black man who identified as an African-American man. And I think that Sister Sophie, who had never had any real significant contact with African-Americans prior to her relationship, learned to appreciate the history and learn to respect it. So I think they both would be very happy.
Joe, what's your take on it?
Oh, not only happy, but I'd say hallelujah. Because if this had happened sooner, Father Grau would have lived a lot longer, and their relationship would have had a lot more life to it. And it would have been also a great education for Sophie to really get the significance of the courage that she had to sort of be in that relationship.
So, Lisa, you wrote this book through the voices of Joe and Father Grau and Sister Sophie. And I'm curious as to why you chose that style of telling the story. Well,
I as an author, generally, I usually do first person anyway. Mm-hmm. But I think that particularly with this story, you really needed to get inside their heads. And I find that when you have what they call the omniscient narrator, you're getting in that person's head. You're getting that person's opinion of what they think the character is thinking or should be thinking. Mm-hmm. And I feel that it's a much more personal relationship with the reader if the reader becomes the character. And so for that reason, it was very important for me to really tell the book through their own words, through the words that I felt they would say. Of course, I never met either Sister Sophie or Father Grau. They both, died a number of years ago. Mm-hmm. But Joe had a lot of notes that he'd taken. And I just, as a writer, I find myself able to kind of get into the heads of my characters. And so I felt as if this was a way of communicating their story in a way that would resonate, really with the readers, which in fact it has.
Mm. So, we talk about the fact that, Father Grau was a Black priest and Sister Sophie was a white nun, but there was so much more to who these people were when they were here with us here on Earth. Joe, tell me, who is Sister Sophie? Give a snapshot of who your mom was.
Funny, great sense of humor, and a real, I don't know if it was an intentional trailblazer, but a real, woman that was open, given some of her previous life history. So she was constantly trying to reinvent herself and move forward. So I guess that's how we capture her.
Mm. And so, and she was very feisty. I mean, she took on her own life, did she not?
Feisty is a great word, actually, that captures it. And in an independent way, which I think allowed her to be open to what happened.
Mm-hmm. And Lisa, you so eloquently described Father Grau. Is there anything else you would want to add to who he was as a person?
Yeah, I mean, I think that he was a person who was very intent on making a contribution to this world. And I think that he felt that as a priest, he could do that through bringing God's word to people and showing that God was a part of all of us and that he was our comforter. But I think that even beyond that, the things that he did in his life in terms of just the work that he did in the community as a pastor, the work that he did, the support that he gave to the black troops, because he was about 10 years older than most of the soldiers. So he was kind of a quasi-father figure to some of them, especially to some of the younger men. And so I feel as if, again, I didn't know him, but I really felt as if he's someone who wanted to make a significant mark in this world, and I believe that he did.
And he had a set of struggles of his own, even before he got to become a priest. Can you talk about that, Joe?
Father Grau, who my father, the daddy, was raised. He's actually mixed race, just like myself. So he was mixed race, raised by his white Irish mother and stepfather, German background, in Cleveland, Ohio. And in that, his sort of sense of identification really didn't sort of happen until he was also with, being the chaplain with the Buffalo Soldiers in Italy, as Lisa was sort of alluding to. So the fact that, he was really grew up in a world that clearly got obsessed in many ways, and quite vicious ways, I might add, with his skin color, it wasn't a real knowledge about his blackness that he experienced until he was with the troops. And I think what impresses me about my father is that, as Lisa pointed out, he took that awareness and knowledge as a way to sort of not only identify, but also to lead in, sort of being with these men in very difficult times, while he was now processing increasingly what the racism meant to him, too. So I just sort of say it because I guess evolved would be an understatement for my father, particularly in terms of his sense of identity and leadership from a black perspective.
But he wasn't even accepted by the Catholic Church in America. He had to go to Rome in order to be ordained. Isn't that right?
Exactly. I mean, which was really his sort of first taste of, probably not his first taste, but some of the black racism just based on skin color, because his mother, did what she could to try to buffer him from it, as a white woman, which, had limitations. So, yes, to your point, that's ultimately how he ended up in Rome, is because of the racism in the Catholic Church here in the U.S. at that point in time.
So, Lisa, how did this love story start?
So the love story started really very, very soon after Father Grau arrived at this little teeny tiny parish in Lackawanna, New York. His real desire from the time that he was actually in the Vatican and had met some African Americans in Paris when he was there on a brief trip was to be in Harlem, because he felt like that was the Mecca. That's where he could make a contribution. But unfortunately, there were no openings at the time. So the only opening was at this tiny parish in Lackawanna, New York. And shortly after he got there, he happened to just be walking one early morning on his, probably early morning constitutional, and he noticed this nun, Sister Sophie, who was shoveling snow. And so it was about 6 a.m. in the morning. He's like, "Wow, that's a lot of work for one person." And as the youngest nun, she was 37 at the time, it was her job to shovel the path every morning so that the older sisters wouldn't slip and fall on the way to Mass. So she was busy out there in the cold and the snow and, buffeted up and, doing her job. And he's like, "What can I help you?" And she had noticed him because he had given one sermon, and she was curious because, an African-American priest, you didn't see them too much. But they'd never had any conversation. And so she said yes. And so what happened was, through the winter, they ended up shoveling snow together every day. And so they became very close. And that opportunity for them to be alone, which frankly they probably would not have had, because I don't know how much alone time a priest and a nun would normally have in the course of their day. But because they had this time every single morning for the whole winter, and if you know Buffalo, that's a long time.
That's a long time.
It's not like a California winter, So they had this time to get to know each other as people, not just as he's the priest and she's the nun, but as she's Sophie and he's Billy. And so it was after that I think that, the curiosity started, becoming aroused. And at that point, they both realized there was something going on. And then it just sort of, moved from there. But that's how it started, was with them shoveling snow every morning for the entire winter. And then it just sort of, the relationship started building. It was sort of, the genie's out of the bottle, and at some point you couldn't put it back in.
So, and I think they dated for 2 years, secretly, obviously, before she got pregnant.
Yeah, they would go to Canada. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. Go ahead, because I'm gonna talk to Joe about something after that. Tell us the rest of the story, Lisa. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what happened is once they both kind of acknowledged that there was something going on, and I won't tell you a whole lot because I want your readers or your viewers, listeners, to actually go out and buy the book. But at one point, it became kind of obvious they had sort of been doing this dance in a not a literal sense, but a figurative sense of, once the snow stopped and they would run into each other. And at one point he tried to, sort of get away from the parish for a little while, go to another parish. But ultimately they both realized something was going on. And when it sort of came to a head is he was giving communion, and he, put the wafer in her mouth. And as he handed her the chalice, the cup, he squeezed her hand and she squeezed back. And that's when they both knew, okay, there's something going on here. And so she was, as luck would have it, she was planning to go to Buffalo to visit her father, who was sick. The Lackawanna is just outside of Buffalo, and he offered to give her a ride. And it was on that trip that they actually had their first kiss, and then they both acknowledged that, okay, there's something going on. And he suggested that they then meet on Tuesdays, and they would go to Canada. So they would drive to Niagara Falls, the Canadian side, and that's significant because in Canada at that time, it was much more liberal. They could go to a motel together, which they did. They could go out to restaurants. They could actually have a life together as a couple, which they really couldn't do. Because remember, in 1955, when the relationship started, a mixed marriage was against the law in many states. Yes. So they could actually have gone to jail, as some couples had, for having their relationship, even beyond the priest and nun thing. So they would, he would pick her up on Tuesdays in Buffalo. She was helping with her father, so she'd go back and forth between the convent and her parents' home. He'd pick her up in the, quote, colored section of town because it would be less obvious than if a black man is in the white section of town. And then they would drive to Niagara Falls. And they had, a very much normal kind of relationship. They would go out to dinner. They would go places. They would laugh. They would make love, obviously. And 2 years later, she ends up pregnant. And she was shocked. He was shocked. But, they were able to get through that period. And Joe was born in Cincinnati, and he was adopted by an incredible family, which we talk about in the book. And then, but at that point, sort of what happens, and he decides, well, I can't live without you. She decides, I can't live without you. He was had gotten a promotion and was now the head parish priest, and he had the opportunity to have a live-in housekeeper. So he asked her if she would come live with him as his housekeeper. And so she did, and they lived together essentially as husband and wife until he died in 1964. And
that entire time, they still kept it a secret.
Oh, yes, very much so. Very much so. Yes.
So, Joe, how old were you when you were told that you were adopted?
Well, actually, I was never told. I was adopted by as Lisa pointed out, a loving family, and a loving, honestly, light-skinned black family, because I had no concept about my adoption, and I should say no concept of people talking to me about what, quote unquote, who my birth parents were, et cetera, et cetera. So it was really just through overhearing conversations that I realized that I was adopted, because my mother, because my father was already deceased by the time I was old enough to figure out any of this. My mother never raised this with me because of a lot of difficulty she had with my older brother and being in that conversation with him. So I say that to say that was a big event for me when I finally found Sophie, to be in that conversation with my adopted mother, because we had never had that conversation. It was just sort of understood. And I figured I was adopted, through other means when I was probably about 7 or 8.
So you were that young. But you started doing your research to find your birth mother once you became an adult.
Oh, well, not only once I became adult, once I got into my 30s, and it was really because of my brother having done the research himself that prompted me to find more information out about my adoption, because I actually wasn't interested, because my adopted mother was still alive, and I just didn't want to, create any strangeness around me even questioning the love that she had given me and raising me, et cetera. So I personally was one of those adoptees who wasn't really going to go down that road, and was really my brother who sort of gave me the information, because the adoptions for both of us were handled through Catholic Charities, and the same social worker happened to have my papers. So it was sort of really a very sort of, I guess, fortuitous situation, but definitely it wasn't a road I was planning on going down, at least while my mother was still alive.
So, and that conversation you had with your mother, was she relieved? Was she not your adopted mother, the woman that you call your mother? Was she relieved, or was she upset that you found out? I mean, what was that conversation like?
My mother, astrologically is Libra, because I'm into astrology. So She was really, let's just not rock my boat. I mean, that was sort of her thing. So I guess she was relieved. And what was missing for me is she never proceeded to tell me my adoption story, nor did I ask. So it was more, I guess, me being relieved, having just at least acknowledged to her that, it's something I'm quite aware of as well. And, so it was really more, for me, it was a combination of relief came to me. And the other piece of this was it gave me a chance to really reaffirm my love for her. That was the biggest thing for me, is not wanting her to feel I had any less love for her, having raised me, now having found my birth mother. So, I was the beneficiary of the conversation, I think, more so than her.
And what was the reunion like with Sophie for you, when the first meeting? What was that like?
Well, the first meeting was on the phone. Okay. And then we ultimately met in person. So I say this because this was initially all on the phone, but my first contact. And what made that significant, it was just voices, right? You didn't have the person there. And there were several things that sort of happened, as I worked through my shock of I'm now on the phone with my birth mother, who is a total stranger to me. And then she is talking to me as if we had just talked yesterday, because she's the woman who gave birth to me. So those 30 years she was with me, whereas in those 30 plus years, I had no contact with this woman. So it was the weirdest dynamic. And so as I sort of worked through my emotions with that, now mind you, we're both in tears because it's really an emotional experience, is out of that, she told me in our first call about her being the nun, my father being the priest, and that being the reason that they couldn't keep me, because Sophie didn't have a whole lot of sort of processing around the racial aspects, and that's a whole other conversation. But she did tell me that part, which as an adoptee was also a relief, because part of being adopted for me was, if I did ever get the information, the biggest question I had is, why was I put up for adoption? So I immediately got that in the first call too. And then, the other benefits would now start to, just realize this strange person does have a connect with me that I don't have, and how is this going to unfold? And she kept the, she kept the, what's the right word, sort of the path open to stay in dialogue. That's another big thing for someone adopted, is what's going to be the follow-up from that initial contact. And she took the initiative to be open and welcome to further contact, which I was appreciative of.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. What do you think about this story? And if you are a person who has been adopted and perhaps you found your birth parents and you'd like to share that story with us, we'd love to hear from you. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. So, Joe, you were at a place, or actually Sophie got sick, and you spent a month, a very intense month, from reading the book, basically learning all about your parents' love for each other and their lives together. Can you talk to us about your feelings as you're sitting there listening in the hospital to Sophie tell you the things that she felt was important for you to know?
Well, let's go back to your comment of feisty.
Okay.
While Sophie was feisty, Sophie had never shared with me intimate details about their relationship. Right? I mean, just for a whole series of reasons. I'm the child, they're the parent. You know, you got the whole drift. So I guess I was sitting there really, to some extent, embarrassed of her sharing this intimacy, yet couldn't get enough of it because she's in the hospital here. I'll be realizing this is probably my only opportunity to get this. And she was going into spaces that she had never sort of gone before in terms of the depth of the intimacy of their relationship. And it just meant so much for me to sort of, I guess, be taking this in. So I went from sort of shock to just couldn't get enough.
So, and she, as we said, she was very feisty. I mean, I think back to that scene, and Lisa, you alluded to this, when she was waiting for Father Grau to pick her up in the colored section of town. In Niagara Falls, before they could go over the border to Canada, and she was confronted by a bunch of black women who were very, very angry because they had seen her and Father Grau connect and go off together, and they weren't happy about it. To me today, that kind of her shock of their anger in a lot of ways reminds me of some of the responses we're getting today as people who are not of color are waking up to what has been happening to black people. What do you think, Lisa?
No, I agree with you. And actually, that was in Buffalo.
Yeah, Buffalo,
because,
right? Okay.
Yeah, he would pick her up in the colored section in Buffalo. But I definitely think that as you said, has a real direct connection to what's going on today. I think that some people who are not of color don't realize the effect that racism and some of the racial stereotypes, for instance, the whole idea of the white woman being on this pedestal and that every black man secretly wants a white woman, which, of course is not the case. Mm-hmm. But I think there's some of that going on. And that combined with just the weight of racism that black Americans feel every single day of their lives. From the minute you go to school, you feel marginalized. You're told either directly or indirectly that for whatever reason you're not good enough. And you always have to climb that mountain a little higher, a little faster. And so I think that for her, she was, just kind of naively thinking, well, I'm with this man. Of course, she knew that he was black. But I don't think that she was aware of the anger and the historical significance of her as a white woman being with a black man, and frankly, an attractive black man who wasn't wearing his priest collar at the time. So all these girls saw was, this is a fine brother, and this white girl gets him. So, and not to justify at all their actions because it wasn't justifiable, but the fact is that's what's going through their head. And in her mind, it's like, I don't know where all this anger is coming from. All I did was sitting on a bench and waiting for you. And so I think that really ties back to the protest, because I think for the first time, a lot of whites are seeing what we have been dealing with for hundreds of years and seeing the brutality, both direct and indirect, and all of a sudden realizing, well, maybe this country isn't exactly what I thought it was. Maybe, things aren't as I was told. Maybe the police aren't the good guys. And maybe not every black person who gets thrown in jail actually belongs there. And so I think that there's this mass awakening in the United States that's happening, not just here, but globally, of things that have just been sort of tamped down and things you just don't really talk about in polite conversation. And all of a sudden it's out there. Now you've got to deal with it. You've got to understand that black people weren't just being sensitive about things, but that there were actually things going on and have always gone on. So I think that if you take that full circle to the book, her inability to really understand why those women were angry, goes back to a lot of the non-whites who've been involved and are saying for the first time, oh, I didn't realize this stuff was really going on. Well, because you never really had your eyes open.
Right. And you really never had to deal with it. If you're just joining us, we're talking about the book Forbidden Love, the true story of a black priest and a white nun who defied society and the church, with author Lisa Jones Gentry and Joe Steele, the son of Father William Graw and Sister Sophie Lagoki. Have you guys heard from the Catholic Church?
Joe, I'll let you answer.
Well, put it this way. The good news is not heard in the sense of coming at us for, putting this out.
Okay.
And again, Lisa wrote the story so beautifully, and so that it really is a love story. So this is not an attack against the Catholic Church. I was raised Catholic, went to Catholic school for 18 years, have clearly parents who are, quite Catholic. So both my adopted parents and my birth parents, clearly. And on the flip side, my outreach to, for example, my Catholic prep high school, to Catholic charities has not been receptive and welcome to, as far as, hosting book signings or, having anything connected with the book. So it's not been a warm and fuzzy receptiveness, and it's not been any barriers presented. I did want to go back to a point, though, that Lisa was speaking to around sort of the currentness of it, because the other piece that I wanted to add to this was being in interracial relationships, because and the importance of having the talk about the relevance of race in a relationship, because as you read in the book, my father, Sister Sophie, my mother, her whiteness was in a way an oasis for him, because she was so naive and it just didn't know, that it's something he really didn't present to her, nor did she press him on it on the other side. So they're both sort of witnessing what's going on with race in various incidents in the book. Yet it wasn't, something that really was used as a way of fortifying the relationship. It was almost like, okay, we got over this and let's move forward. So I guess there's a sadness in that around. On one hand, those people are surviving and not talking about race, yet the relationship is suffering and not having that conversation.
Yes, that is it.
And I think,
Go ahead.
Yeah, what's going on currently, I think, is a lot of, particularly across race, and particularly if you're in an intimate relationship with someone, race is very relevant.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Those are the numbers to call to join our conversation. Michael joins us from Norfolk. Hi, Michael. You're on the air.
Hi, fascinating show, and I really appreciate it, especially at these times.
Thank you.
Do you know by chance in Norfolk history, or did the guests in African-American Roman Catholic churches, how did St. Mary's, the historic mini basilica, become an African-American Catholic church from an Irish community, a Roman Catholic church?
I'm not sure if they know the history, but let me ask them. Do you guys know the history of St. Mary's? The Basilica of St. Mary's? Yeah.
I do not.
I don't know the history of St. Mary's. And back in the 50s, the way it worked, particularly in Buffalo and probably throughout the country, was that the Catholic Church segregated itself. And the way they did it is they had mission parishes. So some of the mission parishes were actually formerly, say, maybe an Irish parish or something. They got, low attendance or whatever. And then it was just converted, quote unquote, into a mission parish. And the mission parishes really were only for the outreach of blacks and Hispanics and Latinos. So I don't know if that may have been a situation where, St. Mary's just went being an Irish parish to, quote unquote, a mission parish.
Joe, you said in the book that Sister Sophie would say to you, I've got to get this out. He keeps telling me I have to tell you. She really was channeling Father Graw.
Oh, very much so. Very much so.
And I wonder how. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
My question to you was, as you're listening to all of this, what are your emotions? Because I can't imagine. I'm sitting here trying to imagine you sitting by her bed. She's ill, but she garners strength to get through the entire conversation and the entire story before she succumbs to her illness. But what were you going through at the time, and how draining was that for you?
Oh, it was actually more of an elation because because that was one of the frustrations I had with my relationship with only Sophie and not meeting my birth father, because he had already passed away when I met Sophie, because Sophie, again, had very limited access through the racial lens. And I identify as a black man. And so there was a whole missing part about my black maleness that Sophie couldn't really provide me because, it didn't connect for her. So when she finally got into some of this intimacy of what she was sharing, I not only helped her connect some of the dots, it really brought life to my relationship with my father, which really meant a lot to me. I had not had that to that point with Sophie.
When Sophie passed away, her family then became aware of you. Is that correct? Am I correct in that?
Well, actually, yes. And that was really the first time, because she made it a point not to have anybody know about me. Mainly more that they still saw they being her family, saw her as a former nun. And then I don't think the racial piece was as big of a thing with her. It was more her having been a nun. And again, I'm real light-skinned, so that's why I say the racial piece wasn't probably a big deal. Because if you look at me, you don't really go to, he's black. So like I said, it was more her perception of having been a former nun and not wanting to know that she had a child.
And were you accepted with open arms?
Put it this way, I'm going to leave it with, thank God I was adopted by a black family, okay? No, that's your question. It was not at all. And these are Polish folks who had already dealt with their share of, discrimination and everything else with having too many vowels on the name. So this family did not now want to know they had somebody, who had black in him coming into the mix. No, so it was not an open arm experience.
Oh, boy. So, Lisa, what can we learn from Father Gras and Sister Sophie's story that can help us in today's turbulent times?
I think that the thing that comes up for me, and, having written it and having really felt like I lived through their story when I was writing it, was that the most important thing is love. And in their case, the right to love, and that truly, although it may sound cliche-ish, that love does triumph. And I think that in terms of the protests and things that we're seeing today, if we can just learn to look at each other as we would like them to look at us. So, if you would feel good having a police kick you in the face, okay, but I think most people wouldn't. And so if that's not the way you want someone to treat you, then treat the other person and look at them and judge them the way they would like you to be judged. And I think that was the thing that, to me, was powerful about the story, was that here you have a black priest, a white nun. In her case in particular, she'd had virtually no contact with black people. Obviously, he'd had a lot of contact with white people because he was raised in a white family. But still, they had to look beyond the labels that society gave to each of them, and particularly the prohibition that society placed on their love, and see each other the way they would like to be seen, and to love each other as who they were, the essence of who they were, not the labels that people put on them. And I think that's, what, for me, this book says to what's going on now is judge each other, love each other the way you would like to be judged and loved.
Absolutely.
And I think that's part of what is motivating these protests as well.
So, Lisa, one of the things that I chuckled at in the story, you talk about when Sophie was living with Father Gras in the parish house, and she obviously had to act as his housekeeper when people would come to visit, and when the priests would come in to have their card games. And how she bristled because she would have to go to the kitchen, or she would have to listen to them, be very chauvinistic. I think that also points to her ability. I mean, she was a strong woman.
Yeah, no, she was. I mean, when you think about it, the choices that she made were not choices that a lot of people would have made or could have made. I mean, she, first of all, made the choice to even have this relationship. She'd been a nun since she was 14 years old, and now she is making the choice to basically defy everything that she's been taught, defy the church, defy society, go every week with this guy to Canada, and engage in an intimate relationship and then have a baby and come back and live with him. I don't know that there's a lot of people, even in today's world, who were nuns who would do that.
That is very true. That is very true.
Particularly not in 1957.
Yeah. And, I thought it was very interesting, Joe, for the adoption agency or for the fact that you were in the orphanage for 18 months, I believe, before you were adopted by the Steeles, who loved you dearly. But for the whole, again, looking now, because now we have on the issue of colorism. So, you were too light for Black people and too dark for white people. And it is just amazing to me that there are all these different layers when you're just a person who needs to have a family to love them. And that's really what Father Gra and Sophie wanted. They wanted a family that was really going to love you.
Yes. And I guess tying this back to today, though, I mean, that's also a reality, is colorism in 2020. Because and even use myself as an example, while I identify as a Black male, because of my light skin, my experiences are very, very different than a George Floyd and others, because of their skin and just their presence. So, and tying back to adoption, back in the 50s, there was a much smaller pool of Black families out there who were actually engaged in a formal adoption process. So the adoptions in the Black community tend to be more informal back then. So, and then with white families, once the white families saw that on my birth certificate, in fact, both on my birth certificate and also there's a letter in my adoption records from the Monsignor of Catholic Charities in Cincinnati back then, saying this child's father's Negro. So the white family immediately found out that this is a mixed race child that they would be about to adopt. So you'll say back, we're talking about the 50s, right? So there was really no appetite there. And then it was, the struggles, and again, that's how God works in strange ways. The sort of wherewithal of the social worker back then to know what, typically fitting in would mean for an adopted child, right? I mean, and unfortunately, she had a previous relationship with the Steele family because they had placed my brother with the Steele family, like more or less about 10 years previously, and had maintained a relationship. So that's sort of how I ended up with the Steeles, because these were people in their late 50s. I mean, they weren't out to adopt no baby. And so, it was really the initiative of the social worker and then the openness of my adopted mother to bring in another child.
Let's see if we can get in one more call. Judy joins us from Norfolk. Hi, Judy. You're on the air. Hello, Judy. Are you there? Well, I guess Judy left us, so we will move on. Lisa, how has this book changed you as a writer, or has it?
No, I would say it definitely has. I mean, I think that it has changed me as a writer because I have been in a situation where, hold on a second, I'm sorry. Finally,
no problem.
Great. Hold on, this phone that never worked before is now. Okay. Anyway, let me
there
go.
We go.
Yeah, finally it worked. So it changed me as a writer because I wasn't writing something I was making up. I mean, I've been a fiction writer. My first book was a murder mystery, but fiction. I've written many, many screenplays, again, all fiction. And so for me, I had to suspend what I may want to have happened and, really create something that was entertaining and something that people could identify with, but that which really happened. So it allowed me to really get within the head of a character, but within what they wanted me to say, if that makes sense, as opposed to what I might say if I was fictionalizing it. So I, created the dialogue because, of course, I didn't know exactly what they said. But again, it wasn't as if I could just sort of go in whatever direction I wanted. I had to still stay within the confines of what actually really happened. So it gave me a lot more discipline, I think, in my writing, but also allowed me to open more to, I think, the characters that I believe were channeling through me. Just as when Joe was talking to Sophie, she was saying, he wants me to to tell you this. I felt
Mm-hmm.
as if he wanted me and she wanted me to tell their story also. And I felt like I needed to be true to their voices. So in that sense, as I said, I think it really gave me a lot of discipline and focus as a writer.
And Joe, I want to ask you, knowing your complete history now, how has that helped you as an African American man?
Well, probably the biggest way is because of what Sophie shared with me, and then what I was able to pick up through, because one thing I appreciate about Lisa is sort of the openness to sort of different ways information comes to you. So a lot of this came to me through dreams, in addition to what Sophie shared. And so the way it's helped me sort of as an African-American man is not only getting connected with my father, seeing how similar we are in many ways in terms of our social justice commitments and using our sort of personage and who we are and what we become to be out there making a difference. So I, really hope I'm making my father proud in the nature of what I'm doing around social justice movements. And he was quite the influence, which I had no idea of until, again, I just sort of, pick some of this up through Sophie and then because of the interest in doing the book, et cetera, through the research. So
did
makes
you,
me proud for following his legacy.
Absolutely. Did you guys meet at Harvard? I'm just curious. We got like a minute left.
Okay. We actually met through the Alumni Association, so we knew each other through there. Yeah, through the whole Harvard Black Alumni group, which is a pretty significant number of people.
That is fantastic. And I hear rumor that there may be a movie about this.
Yes. You are correct. We are in already actually have a deal with an extremely well-known Hollywood producer. We'll give you the first scoop when we're in pre-production. We promise to come back and tell you about it. But yes, we are definitely. This will be a movie.
That is fantastic. That is Lisa Jones Gentry, who is the author of Forbidden Love, and Joe Steele, who is the recipient of the love between Father Grau and Sister Sophie. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us here on Another View, and we will be right back.
Hi, I'm Claude McKnight of the group Take 6, and you're listening to Another View.
There's a new sun rising. I can see a new horizon. People keep realizing you're the biggest part of me.
I could just listen to the whole song. Anyway, tomorrow marks World Sickle Cell Awareness Day. If you don't know much about sickle cell or how it impacts lives, you're about to learn. Our Lisa Godley shares the story of an amazing 13-year-old who, when she's not dancing or winning pageants, is living with this debilitating disease.
Ayanna Johnson is a very busy 13-year-old. Not only is she an honors student at her Suffolk Middle School, she's a dancer, a violinist, and a pageant winner.
And the new Miss Piedmont Region Outstanding Team is Ayanna Johnson.
In addition to all this, Ayanna lives with a type of sickle cell known as SC.
This past year, I was hospitalized twice, and it can be more or less times than that depending on the year. But for me, it's really, I can't even really control how I'm going to participate in those activities when things like a sickle cell crisis comes, because I have to get pulled out of school if it's really bad and it's not controllable.
And this has been going on since Ayanna was a little girl.
It's my first crisis, and it was a very traumatic experience. It happened when I was 5 years old. So I didn't quite know what was going on, because the pain that I experienced, it's not the same as falling down or getting a bruise or a cut. It feels different. You know something's off with your body. For me, I usually have a crisis either in my arms or legs, sometimes both, sometimes my joints. And for me, it usually feels like throbbing, like somebody's constantly poking me with a knife all over my body.
She says the pain can last just a few days, linger a few weeks, or hang around for months.
I used to get really scared. I used to cry. And now it's just about going through the process, embracing the process, because it's unpredictable. I've grown up very preventative. So when I'm going through a crisis, my best thing is focusing on my mental health and just staying calm. I think that's one of the most important things. Or if I get more worked up, I'm going to get even more sick.
When someone is battling sickle cell, normal red blood cells change their shape from a circle to a sickle or crescent shape. Judy Anderson, the executive director of the Sickle Cell Association here in Hampton Roads, explains what happens next.
What is happening is that those cells have pointed edges. When they take on that shape, instead of being round, those pointed edges are very sticky. So those cells clump together, causing clots. And those clots can get caught in very tiny blood vessels, causing extreme pain, maybe in the hands, maybe in the feet. But it can sickle every part of the body.
In an effort to bring awareness to sickle cell, next weekend, the sickle cell warriors who've passed away and those still battling the disease will be remembered with more than 200 named luminaries on the grounds of Fort Monroe. But because of social distancing, instead of inviting people out, the event will be recorded and shared on social media. Sickle cell affects about 100,000 Americans and is present in 1 out of every 365 African Americans. While symptoms and treatments vary from person to person, there is no cure. And the reason Ayanna Johnson has made it her mission to not only bring awareness to the disease, but uplift and empower those battling it.
So I just want people living with sickle cell to keep busy and do something that they enjoy and don't just be in sick mode. Try to get out of that and find something that you are passionate about and pursue what you're passionate about, and that's truly what I want to do also with my platform as a title holder is encouraging people to do things they're passionate about, empower, educate, especially within the sickle cell community.
For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
What a brave young woman. World Sickle Cell Awareness Day is tomorrow, Friday, June 19th. In an effort to promote awareness, everyone is asked to wear a red shirt and turn on a flashlight, cell phone light, porch light, or any light at 8 p.m. tomorrow. And then post your lighting pic on Facebook at facebook.com/sicklecellhrva. And on June 26, roll up your sleeves and donate blood at the Save a Life Sickle Cell Blood Drive, sponsored by Military Circle Mall, the New Journal and Guide newspaper, and the Sickle Cell Association. It's at the venue near Theater, 800 North Military Highway in Norfolk. To schedule an appointment, visit redcrossblood.org. That's it for us today on Another View. Next Thursday, what African American men really want in a relationship. Psychologist Pamela LaViste Bell with her Grown Folks Conversations. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Todd Washburn is our audio engineer, and Dr. Barry Graham answered our phones. I'm Barbara Hamlee. Stay safe, everyone, and we'll see you next Thursday at noon for Another View.